Awakening Your Inner Goddess with me, Dee Savoie, your Goddess Awakening Guide. And let's start today by clearing a little bit of the energy. And now this is something I don't use a lot, but I happen to have it, so I figure I'm going to use it in a good way. And this is a little bit of white sage. Now, the reason why I don't use white sage is because it, number one, is endangered. So many people have been working with white sage for so long that it has now become an endangered plant. The second reason is that many of the Native American tribes have asked us not to use white sage since it is sacred in their practice, and we just like to sage stuff, but it is sacred in their practice. So let's get a little bit of energy going here, a little bit of clearing. Beautiful. It has a beautiful scent and also has some kind of flower, I think maybe a mum or something attached to it. So let's clear our energy, clear our space. Excuse me. All right. And now we're ready to continue on. And one thing I love about this particular bundle is that it really, a lot of times you have difficulty getting sage to stay lit. I have not had that problem with this bundle. It's really doing a great job of clearing energy. I'm going to take some more smoke and just bring it around to clear. And believe it or not, science has already proven how sage or other plants that you use for smoking, I don't call it smudging anymore, I call it smoking, how these plants work. And that is that when you see the rising smoke, and you can still see it now, it's still going nearby, right? But that the smoke attracts the bacteria in the air. And as the smoke rises, it carries the bacteria away with it. So oftentimes we want to do smoking someplace where we also have great ventilation so that bacteria can be carried away and we don't have to deal with it anymore. So even though it is a spiritual practice, it has also been proven to be a scientific practice as well, for clearing energy, for clearing bacteria, and for clearing ourselves. So there we go. So today what we want to talk about, because it is Valentine's Day 2023, we do want to talk about love. And even though Valentine's Day is related to romantic love, I really want to talk about a different topic, and that is self-love, because we are each our own true first love. Even though we may think of ourselves as being babies and being loved on by others, we are also our own first love, because as babies, our brains are not developed enough for us to even differentiate ourselves from the caregivers around us. We assume that the caregivers' sole purpose is to take care of us. And so when we are hungry, we cry because we don't have words. When we're tired, we cry because we don't have any means of expressing our tiredness any other way. You know, when we're wet or whatever our needs are as a tiny baby, we cry to let that caregiver aspect of ourselves, we see that as part of ourselves. We do that so that caregiver aspect of ourselves will come and take care of us. They will come and they will remove the wet clothes, or they will come and provide the food that we need, or they will come and help us fall asleep. whatever it is that we need as teeny tiny babies. So the point of bringing this up is that we at all times have a caretaking aspect within ourselves that we need to activate in order to take care of the tiny baby, the little girl, the teenager, the young woman inside ourselves that still needs our help and our healing, depending on whatever stage we're at right now. I don't know anybody who has had a perfect life where there was nothing untoward that ever happened, and then they got perfect love and attention from the people around them. That just isn't reality. And even when the people around us love us and have the best intentions for us, they may not be able to provide those things that we need for whatever reason, for just life happening, right? So there is always an aspect of us that will need healing. Now, that's talking about ourselves as, people here already, right? But when we also think about our gestational time and our birth, there's plenty of things that can go wrong during these times. And that is why it is the most dangerous time in the life of a woman. And is the most dangerous time in the life of that growing fetus that eventually will be born and become a child. So this is life and death stuff here. And that's why it is so impactful on our lives, whatever happened during our birth and gestation. And then add to that, whatever generational trauma your family might be bearing. Now, we all know that so many people these days are talking about breaking generational curses in their families, correct? Everywhere I turn, everywhere I see on social media, when I listen to young people, they're all talking about breaking those generational curses that have plagued their families. And while that is certainly a noble effort, you have to have generational curses in order to have something to break, right? We all know that there are certain issues, certain problems, whether it's health-wise, whether it's an emotional issue, that tends to run through your family. Like, for example, in my family, everybody has, ends up with high blood pressure and diabetes, almost everybody in my family. So we know that we have these illnesses that run through the family. We also have in my family, I don't know why this is, but an issue with teeth. Now, I think I know why that is, but I'm going to keep that to myself a little bit. But it is just an example of how, when we are talking about what goes on in a family, how it can just come down that familial line, regardless of whether people have any intention for that to happen at all, whether they intend to pass that on or not. And that's why when people talk about changing the trajectory of their family line, it has to be a conscious act. You have to consciously decide that it is now time for that either illness or whatever that is plaguing that family. It's time for that to end and to take a conscious step toward doing so. Okay? But as I said, let's talk about love. And our first love is always ourselves. And we always need to have that part, that caretaker part of ourselves that is willing to step in and do for us all those things that may not have been done for us as children, the ways in which our caretakers kind of fell down on the job for whatever reason, whether it was with a lack of resources, a lack of time, a lack of will, a lack of desire to take care of us, who knows? But this is what self-love is all about. We talk all the time about self-love. And sometimes people just think of self-love as the idea of pampering ourselves. We'll go out and we'll go to the spa. We'll go out with our girlfriends and eat some good food and maybe have some good drink, that kind of thing. But self-love goes even deeper than that. And one of the things that we really need to focus on when we're thinking about self-love is really looking at ourselves for who and what we are. We need to really think about ourselves in terms of what we are authentically, not who we want to be, not who we're striving to be, not who we think we are, but really be objective and look at ourselves in our fullness and see where we are, where we want to be, and acknowledge that there can be a gap between those two things. Those two ideals may be completely at, different odds. And recognizing that that's the work, that's the job, that's the joy, actually. That is in finding our true, authentic self and allowing her to come out and be nurtured and taken care of and understood. And that is what we are all seeking to do. When we say we want to break a generational curse, that means we want to be free to be who we authentically are without the stipulations of our families. You have to be like this, you have to go like this, you have to talk like this, you have to give this much money or not give this much money, or marry this kind of person, or whatever those things are that our families put on us and tell us these are the things that we must do and these are the ways that we must behave. What we are trying to identify is ways in which to be free, ways in which to be our authentic selves, free of all those strictures placed on us by our families. So now, the other thing I want to talk to you about is that, to just bring home a little bit more, is that all love is self-love. There is no such thing as love outside of ourselves. When we start out, as we were talking about those little tiny babies, the only thing we understand is that our needs need to be met. And the degree to which we believe we are taken care of and we believe that we are loved depends on how much and how well our caregivers take care of us. And that's our first introduction to love, to self-love, because we believe that those caregivers are actually part of us. And that when they fail us, we have failed ourselves. And so we look at love and feel as if we have disappointed ourselves until we become old enough to recognize that the people who are our caregivers are actually individuals separate and apart from us that we don't really have any control over. And that can make a big difference in our life when we begin to recognize that there is a difference between those who would care for us and the way that we need to care for ourselves. And unfortunately, many times in our society, particularly as women, we are made to feel guilty, first of all, for having a need in the first place. And second of all, because we are socialized to be the caregivers for everyone else. And that our needs, as we grow from being young children and infants up to grown adults, we tend to lose more and more of our autonomy, and our authenticity to the expectations that others in our sphere have for us. We have to learn how to take over that caretaker role in ways that preserve our authenticity and our autonomy in our lives. And that's not an easy task. So what we want to be able to remember is to nurture all aspects of ourself from that infant to whatever other ages we are where we have felt abandoned, neglected, uh, disrespected, not cared for in ways that we would like to be cared for. And we have to make sure that we re-nurture ourselves, that we that we come to understand what our needs are and learn how to satisfy them. But before we can do that, we really have to acknowledge that it is okay to love ourselves. It is okay to put ourselves before others. And we tend to take care of ourselves the way we have been taken care of. If our parents or other caregivers have been neglectful, we tend to do the same things to ourselves and do it in the same exact way. If our caregivers have been like nervous or didn't know what to do or incompetent, we tend to be the same way about ourselves. If our caretakers, just really don't care, we tend to do the same things to ourselves. And so that when we say we want to, get rid of whatever generational issues we have in our families, it has to be a conscious effort, because without that conscious effort, we continue to do the same things that have been done to us. And the reason why people do certain things to us is because that's, in all likelihood, what was done to them. They were raised in the same way that we were. And so therefore, our natural inclination is to do one of two things. When it's our turn to parent, whether it's to parent ourselves or to parent actual children, is that we either parent exactly the same way we were parented, or we try to go the exact opposite route of whatever was done to us when we recognize that that was not working, or that was not helpful, that was not the right way to go. And neither is really all that helpful, because it seems as if we pick polar opposites when really something maybe somewhere in the middle is really what was needed. That's why you think about, say, Gen Z is always complaining about how, they had no supervision and they would just run wild through the streets. And then what did they do when they became parents? But to become helicopter parents, where they had to know every damn thing their child was doing. When you take care of anyone out of fear or out of resentment or out of a feeling of neglect, that is never going to net you just the kind of caring that you want to have for whoever's coming after you. And it's really not breaking the cycle, even if you do something different, because you're still operating from that same place, either of neglect or fear or incompetence or whatever it was that was guiding the generation before you not to parent as well as they could. So what we really want to do is to get back into that first love we have, which is ourselves. We are our own first love, and we have to be the caretaker of that first love. And we have to understand that there are parts of ourselves that may need reparenting because of the lack of parenting, the lack of love, the lack of caring, the lack of understanding that we never got as infants or children or young adults or whatever the case may be. And so we really have to focus our attention on whatever, not on what the deficiencies were necessarily, but on how to fill our cup up again with self-love in a way that doesn't make us feel like we're just being selfish. Because especially as women, we are programmed that we're supposed to be taking care of everybody. We're supposed to be the nurturers and the caretakers and whatever. And many times we go without caretakers of our own. And that's even a disease, caretaker's disease. People who need care survive, and the person who's caring for them passes away. That happened to a client of mine who had he was in his, I think, 70s, and his mom was in her 90s. She was like 97 or something. And he was taking care of her by himself because, sometimes this is how it is. The rest of the family doesn't really want to get involved. And if any one person looks like they'll do some work, they get all the work, right? They get all the caretaking responsibilities, because the one thing he didn't want was for her to be in a home. Well, he has a heart attack. He dies. Mom goes in the home. And I think for ourselves, we have to make sure that we are intervening on our own behalf before we get that caretaker's disease, before we fall down on the job, before we do ourselves so badly that we are damaged. We're damaging part of ourselves to take care of that inner child inside of us. And one of my favorite ways to just even start on that path of self-love is to get a mirror. Let me see. I had my mirror here. Where'd it go? I had it here. Of course, I put it aside somewhere. Let me see. Oh, here we go. I got a beautiful mirror here. If you have a mirror, you can take it out. And one of the things I love to do, unfortunately, this particular mirror is a magnifying mirror, so I can't see my whole face, but I can see parts of it, right? And I can just take a look into that mirror, and I can look at my face. This is not the face I started out with. A million years ago, I didn't have any lines. I didn't have any wrinkles. I didn't have any gray hair. Well, I started going gray at 17, so I still pretty much had gray hair, right? But I was really good at dyeing it up, let me tell you. There were no hairs on my chin. There was, all of these things that I could look at right now that are signs of getting older. And I could feel bad about that. I could feel really bad about that. I could look at my face and say, well, look at all these things that are wrong with it. Okay. Or I can look at my face with the eyes of love and recognize, I'm getting myself emotional now, and recognize this beautiful person, regardless of what my features look like, right? We all hold the spark of the goddess, of the divine within our faces, within our bodies. And so we can look at ourselves. Do you look at yourself with love, or do you look at yourself as somebody who needs to get fixed, as somebody who has flaws, who need to be covered up? Or do you just really appreciate the vision of the goddess that you see looking back at you when you look in the mirror? And I strongly suggest not to use, first of all, don't use your magnifying mirror, but I strongly suggest that you take a look at yourself in the mirror and just speak some love into who you see looking back at you. Because no matter what you see, there is beauty in your face. There is love in your face. There is divinity in your face. And you can honor that by looking at yourself with eyes of love rather than, criticism or critiquing. Okay. And then you can graduate to looking at your whole self. Right. To look at each part of your body, especially, as you get older or fatter or, less mobile or whatever that comes with being a mature person. And you can look at those different body parts and be, my breasts used to look like this, or my hips used to look like this, or my legs used to look like that when I was younger, or when I was skinnier, or when I was in better shape, or whatever. But if you look at yourself with the eyes of love and speak love into every part of you, especially those parts that you don't like so much, or those parts that maybe don't work so well, or those parts that hold you back, and speak some love into them. And you will find that the more you love on yourself, the more you take care of yourself in that way, the better you're going to feel about everything you see about yourself. And you'll notice that what's inside of you will radiate out more completely when you are not so worried about what you see on the outside. That's an exercise that I would like you to work on. Just the idea of being able to look at all parts of yourself with the eyes of love, because you are love. You are conceived and born in love, regardless of the circumstances of your conception, gestation, or birth. You would not be here without love. So the next part of what I want to talk about has to do with sending yourself some love. Like where in your body do you work on sending love to yourself? And that's of course in the heart area, you know, because your heart there's two parts of the heart chakra. There's the heart, right? That is all about joy and connection and feeling good and feeling connected. But we also always have the feminine aspect of our chakras, and that is the lungs. And the lungs are the place that holds sorrow, that holds grief, that holds the darker aspects of the emotions, right? Feeling despair, whatever. And in order for you to bring in more of that joy and connection and relationship, you have to release the grief. You have to release the fear that you may be holding and harboring within the lungs. And I think that's something else, when we talk about the impact that COVID has had on us, of all of that congestion in our lung area, really, I think to some degree represented all of that grief and despair and the heaviness of breath just to survive that time. And the longer we went, or the longer we have gone in this pandemic, the less and less this seems to be the focal point of the disease, right? At first, we really did have so much grief and pain that needed to be released. And so what we can do now to really focus on that self-love area is the heart, the lungs, and for us women in particular, the breasts. Breasts are our place of nurturance, even for ourselves, of feelings of just being able to sustain ourselves, to be able to feel as if we carry the ability to nourish and to nurture ourselves, not just the children we might have, but to do the same for ourselves. If all love is self-love, even when we have a child of our own, the love we have for ourselves, or the amount of love that we have for ourselves, is reflected in how well or how poorly we can care for that child. And so I'm going to ask you to I'm going to get this thing out the way here, the mala, and just to put your hands anywhere you want to on your breasts, and just feel into that energy for a moment, and to take a deep breath And as you exhale, release any feelings of sorrow, of grief, of longing. Just let it go. And breathe in one more time. And let it go. When you inhale this time, hold it. And gather up any energies that need to be released from the lungs. And release. Listen to the sound of the drum as if it were a heartbeat. Breathe in love, breathe out fear, breathe in light, breathe out darkness, breathe in joy, breathe out pain, breathe in truth, breathe out ignorance, breathe into your breathe into your heart. Simple way, simple truth. Simply open your heart to all that is, to all that is. Light, die, 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 light, die, 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 die. And this love gives me wings, and this love carries my dreams, and this love carries my dreams, carries my dreams.